Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. I want you to picture this. You are standing dead center in a war zone. You're on a warship pitching in the churning waters of the Yellow Sea. The air around you is just thick, right? It's thick with that metallic smell of copper and the sharp sting of antiseptic. And right there on the surgical table in front of you lies a desperately wounded soldier, his life literally slipping away by the second. The ship's captain turns to you, his eyes wide with absolute desperation, and he looks to you to save this dying man.
Can you save him? Well, you look back at that captain with total, unshakable confidence. You give him a reassuring nod, knowing full well that you haven't attended a single solitary day of medical school in your entire life. 0 clinical training. No degree. And yet, you are about to perform major surgery. I know, it sounds like some crazy Hollywood script, but it's actually exactly how Ferdinand Waldo Demara Jr. operated. He didn't just steal identities. He essentially became exactly who the world desperately needed him to be in moments of ultimate crisis.
So, to really understand how Demara pulled off this ultimate illusion of authority, we need to take a look at the blueprint of a grifter. He was born into wealth back in 1921 in Lawrence, Massachusetts. But then, the Great Depression hit, and it wiped his family out pretty much overnight, dropping them into a shabby tenement. You know, this sudden traumatic loss of status absolutely shattered his world. Desperately looking for some kind of structure and safety, he actually fled to a Trappist monastery. And it was there, within those silent, holy walls, that he had a profound realization. People blindly trust confident authority figures. Armed with this insight, by 1941, he took his theory straight into the U.S. Army, trying to fake his way into the officer ranks. Of course, it led to botched impersonations, fake deaths, and eventually a court-martial. But the crazy thing is, he was really just getting started. Now, most criminals would take a military court-martial as a massive red flag to just stop, but not Ferdinand Demara. From those early military failures, he actually developed his golden rule of deception, and it goes like this. To successfully hijack a life, you must never steal the identity of someone who is watching you. You have to steal the identity of the invisible. You target the unassuming, the quiet folks, the people who are off the grid, or maybe transitioning in life, so there's absolutely no one around to double-check their whereabouts. And during the sheer chaos of the Korean War, Demara perfectly executed this rule. He set his sights on the real Dr. Joseph Sire, who was this mild-mannered, deeply religious Canadian doctor. Demara befriended him, listened to him intently, and basically memorized every single detail of his background and credentials. Once he had what he needed, Demara simply vanished, literally taking Joseph Sire's entire existence with him. Which brings us right into the anatomy of a con. Armed with nothing but forged transcripts and a stolen diploma, Demara became a surgeon. He literally walked into a Canadian military recruitment office, and the recruiters didn't even blink. They just handed him a commission and booked him a ticket straight to the front lines aboard the destroyer HMCS Cayuga. Now, how does someone with 0 training survive as a surgeon on a warship? Well, he hacked human nature using 3 core psychological principles. First up, the power of the uniform. When people see official insignia, they intrinsically want to trust it to avoid cognitive dissonance. Second, tactical vocabulary. Demara would actually lock himself in his cabin at night, just furiously memorizing medical textbooks like Gray's Anatomy, all so he could toss out exact clinical jargon with the nurses the next day. And third, total confidence. He projected this aura of absolute icy authority. And it perfectly illustrates exactly why he got away with it. If you act like you belong, people will actively help you cover your flaws. When that small boat packed with bleeding, shrapnel-torn soldiers actually arrived in the Yellow Sea, Demara didn't have a senior surgeon to consult. It was totally sink or swim, so he coldly improvised. He was clamping arteries based on what he had just skimmed the night before, and against all odds, miraculously, his patients survived. The crew's absolute belief in his authority effectively served as a shield for his complete lack of expertise. I mean, if he hesitated during a procedure, the nurses just assumed the brilliant doctor was tired.
Now, it is incredibly easy to treat this whole story like some fun cinematic caper, but we really have to look at the psychological toll here, because Ferdinand Demara's crimes caused a uniquely devastating kind of damage.
He didn't just steal their bank accounts, right? He stole the reality. The real Dr. Sear had his entire professional reputation violently hijacked. The poor guy couldn't practice medicine freely and spent years desperately trying to convince authorities that a madman was literally wearing his skin. And then think about those unwitting naval patients, men who trusted their bodies and their lives to the military health system, unknowingly placed into this terrifying game of medical roulette with a high school dropout. Demara basically made the very concept of institutional trust look like a tragic joke. So you might expect a mastermind like this to eventually be taken down by some brilliant, elaborate police sting. But the great unmasking was brought on entirely by his own insatiable ego. Back in 1951, the press was hauling Dr. Sir as this absolute miracle surgeon. Magazines were actually publishing glowing profiles complete with his photograph. Well, as it turns out, a sharp-eyed mother reading a Sunday paper up in New Brunswick, Canada, looked at that photo and immediately realized the hero surgeon was not Joseph Sir at all, but a man she knew years prior named Ferdinand Demara. She called the Navy. Of course, an internal investigation hit a total brick wall of flawlessly forged credentials, but Demara, who seemed to have this built-in sixth sense for danger, didn't wait around to be arrested. He just quietly resigned his commission, walked right off the ship, and vanished into the fog. But of course, he didn't stop there. Over the next decade, Demara kept inventing brand new lives, just shedding his identities like a snake shedding its skin. He became a brother of Christian instruction, teaching at a college in Maine. He reinvented himself as a civil rights worker. He even somehow managed to get himself appointed as a warden at a maximum security prison in Texas. It's wild. Every single time the authorities got close, he just packed his bags and became somebody else entirely. But the sheer weight of a life built entirely on lies eventually has to collapse, right? In 1957, while he was working as a college dean and a teacher, a curious student happened to recognize his face from an old magazine article about the imposter doctor. The authorities finally caught up with him, which led to the highly publicized and totally sensational trial of the Great Impostor. And let me tell you, that courtroom was packed to the doors. And here is perhaps the most baffling revelation from his entire trial. Absolutely none of his victims wanted to see him destroyed. When the naval officers, students, and prison guards were actually called to testify against him, many of them spoke with this bizarre warmth. They admitted that, strangely enough, he was actually quite good at the jobs he was faking. Because his primary motive was this sort of pathetic, obsessive compulsion to be great rather than malicious greed, the courts were remarkably lenient, and he ultimately earned a surprisingly short sentence. Demara ended up spending his final years as a genuine, completely unfaked hospital chaplain before passing away in 1982. But the legacy he leaves behind gives us a profound and frankly terrifying lesson about the illusion of authority. He proved, totally beyond a shadow of a doubt, the incredible power of cognitive bias. He showed that human beings are fundamentally wired to surrender their critical thinking. If you perfectly fit the mold of what we desperately need you to be, if you just have the confident smile, the fluent jargon, and the official title, we will almost always trust appearance over verified substance. Demara didn't have to hack a computer database. He just hacked human nature. Which brings us to one final, lingering question for this explainer. The next time you meet someone who seems just a little too polished, entirely too perfect, and happens to flawlessly fit exactly what you need in that very moment, well, who are you blindly trusting today? Just remember the man who proved that absolutely anyone can be a hero, just as long as nobody asks to see the receipts.